action. I am going to try to film this month's reading wrap up in basically one shot, mostly because I'm a little bit crunched on time today. It's already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I still have to edit this and post it, write a reflection for one of my grad school classes, drive to campus, print my 2 assignments that are due today, and then I have class all tonight from 5:20 until 9:30. We'll see if I can get this in as short a time as possible and get my editing done really quickly. I might be able to at least start uploading it before I end up going to campus. So this month I read 14 books. I am on track for my yearly goal of 150 books this year. I think I'm 1 or 2 books ahead of that goal, which isn't a ton, but as much as I can front load, I do try to do, simply because I tend to hit a little bit of a reading slump in like April and May, and then I also hit a little bit of a slump usually around October. I'm not entirely sure why, but I'm trying to be a little bit more consistent this year by also having a monthly goal of 15 books. I am 1 behind my monthly goal, but that's okay because overall I'm still meeting the on track for my yearly goal. My first book of the year was a Kindle Unlimited book. It is called The Christmas Leap. Let's see, a lot of light in my room. It's called The Christmas Leap by Kira Andrews. It's actually the second book in the Festive Fakes series. This follows Will and Michael. It is a male-male romance. It's fake to real relationship, and it's also friends to lovers, which those are 2 of my favorite tropes. I honestly have a lot of favorite romance tropes, but fake to real relationship is usually goes right along with forced proximity, and I love both of those. So it's definitely high up there on my trope list. It was a holiday romance, and I read the second book in the series first accidentally. I didn't realize it was a series. I did like that it took place in a completely removed setting from their normal life. So instead of being a situation where there was a lot of angst going back and forth, Will and Michael had not seen each other for several years because Michael was like secretly in love with Will for a really long time, and Will was trying to figure out whether or not he even was attracted to men. Overall, I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a solid start to the year. The writing style did leave a little bit to be desired. The overall plot, as much as I did enjoy it, I didn't love some of the situations that they were put in and how uncomfortable Michael was some of the times. So I was feeling like secondhand awkwardness while I was reading this book, and that's never a good vibe for me. The secondhand awkwardness, I can deal with it a little bit, but this took it to a little bit higher of a level. The second book that I read this year was The Christmas Deal by Kira Andrews. So this is the first book in the Festive Fakes series. I did read them backwards, however, I enjoyed this one a little bit more, so I'm almost glad that I read them backwards. It is also a holiday romance, and it features Seth and Logan, so it's another male-male romance. In this scenario, Seth is in this huge house by himself. He basically hasn't done any work to it. He meets Logan, who is a single dad with a late middle school aged son. Eventually they end up falling in love, so it's primarily like a forced proximity situation where Seth says that Logan and his son can live with him, and they enter into a fake relationship so that Seth's boss will kind of look at him more fondly. Seth's boss tries to promote people who have families, especially gay men and women, because her own brother was estranged from her family for being gay. So this is, I guess, her way of like making reparations. The logic was not totally there for me in this story. I understood why they ended up developing a relationship, but I didn't love how Logan went about some of the things that he did. I understand that it was written that way because he is confused with his own sexuality, but it just wasn't my favorite. So 4 stars. for the Christmas deal. It was still really great. Not a 5-star quite, but if somebody was interested in trying a male-male holiday romance, I would definitely point them in the direction of the Festive Fake series. The third book that I read this year was The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This is a nonfiction book, and it was my first nonfiction book of the year. I initially listened to it on audiobook while I was driving, and that's how I prefer to take in my nonfiction books that I'm reading. I ended up buying a physical copy of it because I really enjoyed this book and I wanted to be able to reference back to specific passages and statistics for information. Overall, I did end up giving this a 4 stars. If you did not watch my January book haul video, which I will put up in the cards, this is about redlining and how our government played a part in segregating American neighborhoods. It focuses a lot on suburban areas, so I found a lot of the information really fascinating. It also talks a lot about how redlining affects school districts, and as somebody who is going into teaching and will most likely be teaching in a public school, that's a topic that really does interest me. So it's historical nonfiction about race relations and redlining in the United States. The fourth book that I read this year was The Companion Project by Chelsea Curto. Pretty cute cover. I actually thought that the basis around this book was so cute. It is a fake to real relationship, dating for hire situation where our two main characters are actually also both academic and career rivals. So they've been academic rivals ever since high school. Now they work at the same law firm and they are career rivals. One is much more privileged than the other. Our male main character, Henry, grew up with a little bit of a silver spoon kind of situation. He doesn't have any debt from school, even law school. And our female main character, Emma, graduated law school with a lot of debt, as most JDs do. So she has started a service where she acts as a professional date for men who need somebody to accompany them to work events or family events. So Henry gets recommended this service by a friend who, like a friend of a friend used it. He doesn't know that it's Emma behind the screen, behind the persona. Her policy is to communicate via email and text message only for a specific amount of time before agreeing to do an event with a prospective employer, I guess you could say. She ends up quoting him the exact amount that she needs to pay off her student loans because it's going to be an entire weekend away at his parents' wedding anniversary party. She ends up agreeing to it. So of course it's forced proximity and also a bit of enemies to lovers, which I really enjoyed. And there was a good amount of angst in this, so I liked that as well. I gave it 3 stars. The reason that I only gave it 3 stars was because the spice was pretty mild. And in my contemporary romances, I like there to be more of maybe like an obvious attraction between the two characters. I also felt like Henry was a little bit of a bully in the beginning. I do think that he redeemed himself, and there were some interesting conversations about sexism in the workplace, but it felt more like a conversation that was dropped in there to say, look, we might be sexist, but at least we're self-aware. So I didn't love that aspect to it. And then the writing style was not my favorite. There are just some writers, some authors that I click with more than others, and this was one where I left each kind of chapter feeling like I wish I had gotten more. So it just wasn't a great writing style for me overall. The 5th book that I read this month was The Co-op by Tara DeWitt. Really, really cute cover, actually. All of Tara DeWitt's covers, the characters are covering their faces, and I actually really like it. I love her artist. I'd love to know who does that because I'm sure they have prints. And if I do find the artist's name, I'll put that in the description box so that we can give them a shout out. This is the story of Lauren and Deacon. They were childhood friends-ish, if you could call it that. Lauren had a very rough childhood, and she resented Deacon for coming in and taking her grandmother's attention. They ended up having a physical relationship when they were teenagers. They were caught by her father, and instead of standing up for Lauren when she had just told Deacon that she loved him, Deacon kind of minimalized their relationship, and her feelings have been hurt ever since. Both of their grandmothers pass away. It's a little bit of a complicated relationship, but their grandmothers married each other, and then their grandmothers passed away, and it turns out that they left Deacon and Lauren co-ownership of the co-op building that they lived in near the beach in California. They both agree to work on the house together to try to get enough money out of the house where they are able to sell it for a profit. Deacon does not trust Lauren to stick around, so he actually says, well, let's get married. And for whatever reason, she agrees. I think that there's a lot of unfinished business between the two. So there was a lot of angst. It was dual point of view, which I die for in my romances. They were both mutually pining after each other, and they both felt at some point like they didn't want to risk the situation that they were in, because they were really only gradually becoming friends despite being very attracted to each other. It didn't 100% blow me away to a 5-star where I was running around yelling to everybody about it. But so far, Tara DeWitt has consistently been a 4 to 4.5 star read for me. One of her books I did give 5 stars last year. I think on StoryGraph I gave this 4.25. I did bump it up a smidgen because overall I felt like the way that their relationship formed and the character development they both had was really something that I enjoyed more than some of her other books. The 6th book that I read in January is Lunar Love by Lauren Kung Jessen. This was my January book of the month pick, and shockingly, I did read it in the month that I received it, which is not my usual when it comes to book of the month. With Lunar Love, I talked about some of these qualities of the book in my book haul video, which again is linked in the cards. So I really liked that both of the main characters were mixed American Asian characters. So they both struggled with this concept of how to fit into their communities. I also loved the addition of the Chinese zodiac and the concept of matchmaking based on your zodiac traits. Both of the characters were really complex. I would have loved it a little bit more if it was dual point of view. Something about dual point of view just does it for me when it comes to romance books. It was enemies to lovers. There was a little bit of fake dating in the beginning, mostly with Liv trying to spy on Bennett and figure out what he was trying to do with his company. The addition of the relationship that they both had with her grandmother, her Popo, was so sweet. I thought that it gave a really great twist on a little bit of a typical trope. And then adding in that the enemies aspect was because they were competing business partners was also something that I really enjoyed. I gave this 4 stars. I loved the banter that they had between each other, and I also felt like they really formed a bond that made sense over time. The 7th book that I read this month is The Setup by Lizzie Dent. I read the back of this book and I actually really liked this idea when I was reading the summary blurb on the back. You know, 1 summer, 2 men, 1 date with destiny. Apparently I have a little something going on this year for the sort of universe, fate, destiny idea. So I went into it really hopeful. So this follows Mara and Ash. It is set in the countryside, well, the seaside in the United Kingdom. So I liked that aspect of it. It was forced proximity, so they do end up living together as roommates. However, the whole time in the book, Mara is focused on this man that she met when she was abroad by herself. and she impersonated a fortune teller to tell him that he would meet the love of his life in her town at the bar down the street from her house on a specific day. So she is essentially saying like, okay, I'm going to tell this man to meet me in 3 months, then I'm going to be all of these things that he's obsessed with. And she ends up like stalking him online. She legitimately becomes like obsessed with him. She's always following his Instagram. She's looking to see like, what do these posts mean? What does he like? She's imagining this future that they could have traveling the world while he's performing in an orchestra, and she is completely blind to what's actually in front of her. There is a lot of personal growth in this. However, I just did not like Mara. I just did not like Mara at all. I couldn't relate to her. I didn't understand why Ash even liked her. And her obsession with her best friend was just so unhealthy. So I just thought it was, I don't know, it just wasn't quite for me. I gave it 3.5 stars though, because I really did like Ash. He was a huge redemption for this book, and I also really liked one of her colleagues and the coworkers that she had at her job. So the supporting characters basically carried the book for me. The 8th book that I read this month was The American Roommate Experiment, and this is by Elena Aramas. It is the 2nd book of the Spanish Love Deception series. They can be read as standalone books. However, the main female character in this, Rosie, is the best friend of the main female character in the Spanish Love Deception, and then Lucas is that same character's cousin. So if you want to know what happens with the female main character of the Spanish Love Deception before you read The American Roommate Experiment, I would, you know, read them in the correct order. I'm not going to be reading the Spanish Love Deception because I did not enjoy this book. I liked the concept of it. I liked that Lucas had his own personal issues and kind of demons that he was dealing with, and I liked that he was definitely a gentleman, but I didn't like Rosie. For some reason in these last 2 books, I just did not like the female main characters. I don't know if it's because I can't relate to them. I don't know if it's because they just come off as like really self-absorbed and whiny or what, but I didn't like either one of them. It was forced proximity, which I do like. That added to my enjoyment of it a little bit. The first chapter was awful. It was genuinely, I thought I was going to DNF it after the first chapter. I had to read the first couple of pages twice because I was cringing so hard that I could barely get through them. Rosie, I didn't like a single thing about her. And the fact that she was so obsessed with stalking Lucas, like she saved a picture from his Instagram on her phone. Okay, it's not like they met on a dating app and she said, oh, here's a picture of the guy I'm going on a date with, you know, in case he murders me. She just was so obsessed with her best friend's cousin that she was secretly saving pictures of him on her phone. It was weird. It was weird and I didn't like it. There was nothing about her character that he liked. And quite frankly, there's nothing about her character that I liked either. So moving on from The American Roommate Experiment, the 9th book that I read this year was another Tara DeWitt book. This one was called Funny Feelings. Very cute, the kissing under an umbrella. Umbrellas are a big part of the story for Farley and Meyer. So they are both stand-up comedians. Meyer is Farley's manager. He has retired from the stand-up comedian scene. He has a daughter who is deaf and they communicate through American Sign Language. In the beginning of the book, we find out that he meets Farley when she bursts into the bar that he has brought his daughter and her friends to for her birthday party. They were supposed to go to a water park and it got rained out, hence the storyline of the umbrella. Farley is fluent in ASL, mostly because her parents needed to enroll her in a class that would force her to use her hands and concentrate on something. So they picked American Sign Language classes, and you get the sense from the book that they live in an area where there's a relatively high deaf population and a really good school for the deaf. So she ends up being a classroom aide at one point for deaf students, and that further enhances her ASL capabilities. They are friends to lovers and mutual pining out the wazoo. I loved Meyer as a male main character love interest. He goes to therapy, he's a single dad, he does everything for his daughter, they communicate through sign language and he's always kind of like boosting her up. He hires one of Farley's friends and one of the workers at the bar to be his like permanent helper with his daughter. However, because there was friends to lovers and mutual pining, I didn't really feel like there was a lot of intrigue into like, ooh, where is this story going? I mean, obviously when you go into romances, the logic is that they're going to end up together, so the intrigue isn't always there. And strangely enough, I actually liked the third act issue that they had in this book. So normally the third act conflict in romances gets me really stressed out, but in this situation, they actually worked through their relationship in a mature way. I think it was a really great example on how to deal with an issue in your relationship. It was showing that it's okay if you need to take time to kind of sort through your own feelings before diving heavily back into the depth of your relationship. So I liked all of that, and it was definitely enjoyable. Again, 4 stars for Tara DeWitt. So far, she has not disappointed me yet. Let's hope it continues that way. The last couple of books that I have for the month are all part of the same series. They're part of the Bad Brothers. The Bad Brothers series was one of the first like alpha male romance series with interconnected storylines that I ever read. I started it back in 2019, and I don't know when it came to Kindle Unlimited, but I checked recently and the rest of the books were all on Kindle Unlimited, so I decided to continue reading that series, and it was a bit of a rough start if we're being honest. So the first book that I continued with is called Bad Kitty. It is a continuation of the Bad Brothers series, but this one starts with the first of our 3 bad cousins. So this was the storyline for Roman and Kitty. It's definitely a bully romance. I'm not that into bully romances. I don't mind like alpha holes to an extent, but there were times where he was just straight up like bullying her and being rude, and I didn't love that. It was definitely a bridge book, so it mainly served its purpose to bring in the identical triplets, which are the bad cousins, and then bring in Kitty and her 2 roommates into the storyline as well. So I'm not sure why these 2 characters really even ended up liking each other. However, I did like the growth that Roman went through, and I liked the addition of the introduction of his dad. The next book in the Bad Brothers series that I read is called Bad Business. So Bad Business, these are all by Jacinda Wilder, by the way. I forgot to say that for the first one. These are all by Jacinda Wilder, and Bad Business is the story of Juno and Remington. So Juno is Kitty's roommate, and Juno is a Yupik Native Alaskan, and I really liked some of the themes of identity in this book and family conflict. So Juno has always wanted to be a tattoo artist, but feels like that will disappoint her parents. Same thing with Remington. He also feels like he's going to disappoint his brothers if he doesn't stay in the family business that they've started, even though he also wants to be a tattoo artist. They both have done tattoos on friends and family beforehand, and they end up kind of supporting each other through this transition in what their dreams and goals are. There's a ton of character development in this book. There's a lot of dealing with difficult relationships and difficult topics, and contentious issues with families and parents, and figuring out, how do I tell my family what I want to do with my life without them being disappointed in me? There were several editing errors though in this book, so that did take down my enjoyment a little bit. And I also absolutely despise the fact that Jacinda Wilder uses the word exotic to describe her Inuit characters. I hate it. There are so many other words that you could use. There are so many other ways to describe a character who is Native American, Native Alaskan, or not white. And the fact that she uses exotic to describe Juno just rubbed me the wrong way. So overall, I gave it 3.5 stars. honestly mainly because of the way that she describes the Yupik and Inuit people in her books. 12th book that I read this month was the third book for the Bad Cousins, and that one is called Bad Medicine. So Bad Medicine is the story of Izzy and Ramsey. They are complete opposites, but in a way that actually works together. So Izzy is a fashion blogger. She had a really rough childhood after her parents both passed away, and she has this kind of like evil stepmother situation going on. So she ran away from home. She signed away her inheritance to her stepmother just to say, like, never bother me again, please. Here's the money, like, let me go. And she ended up in Alaska, where she works at a high-end clothing boutique. Ramsey is, of course, there with his two triplet brothers. So he's the third of the triplets, and he is the youngest by, I think, like 7 minutes or something like that. So they always tease him about that. There was a good amount of character development, but I didn't really like Izzy. I didn't like the way that she treated Ramsey, and I think that that's what bothered me more than anything else. I do like the portrayal of Ramsey as this like rough and tumble, outdoorsy woodsman who ends up kind of challenging Izzy to go on this hike with him. They end up hiking for 3 days. It's literally her first time even like walking on a walking path on a hiking trail, it sounds like, and she doesn't give up. So I do like that about her character. And I really liked the setting of the story. I love that they were out on the trails and in the woods. I liked Ramsey a lot more in this book than I liked the other male characters. He is certainly not a bully. He is more of like an alpha dominant personality, but it was not a bully romance. So this one got 3.5 stars. I did take off stars because I didn't like Izzy, and there were some editing errors in this as well, to the point where this one was actually a little bit distracting because they would get the point of view wrong for like 2 or 3 paragraphs in the middle of a chapter. If you're doing dual point of view, it's imperative that you actually are consistent with the points of view, in my opinion. So the last 2 books that I read this month were also part of the Bad Brothers series, but they introduced a new round of people, I guess, to it. So the first book that we have is Bad Daddy. Like I said, these are all by Jacinda Wilder and all a continuation of the same series. So Bad Daddy is the story of Lucas Bad, and he is 62. There's a little bit of an age gap romance here, but the female main character is also a regular adult with children. So her name is Liv. So this is the story of Lucas and Liv. Liv is almost 50 and Lucas is 62. So this is the end of the bads and the beginning of the goods. So Liv's last name is actually Good with an E at the end. So we have the bads with the double D, and then we have goods with an E. And she's the mother of 5 daughters. Clearly, we're introducing these 5 daughters so that we can have their stories come into play later on in the series. I am a little bit of a completionist when it comes to these kinds of books, so I might just read all of them, even though my enjoyment is like decreasing at a rapid pace. So for Bad Daddy, it was friends to lovers with a huge focus on character development. Lucas Bad is an alcoholic who's in recovery. He has been sober for a little bit over a year when he meets Olivia Goode. He's really just stagnant. He was in a crash that he caused because he was drunk driving. Thankfully, he did not hurt anybody else, but he did do severe damage to his own body. He walks with a limp. He doesn't do any of his physical therapy or his stretches, and he is generally kind of like mad at the world and just existing. Olivia encourages him to really try for not just himself, but for his kids. You know, he was not a good dad while they were growing up. He was not present. He was an alcoholic. There is a lot of growth in the relationships between Lucas and his sons. So I really liked that aspect of it. I also really liked the way that this book was set up. So Olivia ended up having to leave Alaska to go to Paris, where her second oldest daughter was in a car crash, and her second oldest daughter actually ended up losing use of her leg for a short period of time, and she was the principal dancer in a dance troupe. I'm assuming she was a ballerina, just in the way that they're talking about her training. She ends up leaving to be with her daughter. She's in Paris for, I believe, 2 to 3 months. And during that 2 to 3 month time period, Lucas does a ton of work on himself. He starts going to therapy. He actually starts going 3 days a week in the beginning. So I love that they showed that, you know, intensive therapy can be a positive thing. And then he starts working on himself physically, so he starts taking care of himself and eating better. And he actually ends up going into business with Ramsey, his son, who is the outdoorsman. So Lucas grew up in Alaska, and he uses the skills that he learned growing up and his familiarity with the forest and the wilderness around Ketchikan, where this is located and set, to his advantage to be a partner with his son. It was 3 stars. In the words of Abby Lee Miller, you were good, but I needed you to be great. It was definitely another bridge book. In other words, it was there to wrap up the bad storyline and then usher in the good storyline. I don't mean literally bad and literally good, but so then our 14th and final book for the month of January is For a Goode Time Call. So this is the first book in the Good Girls aspect of the Bad Brothers series. So you can see we switched from blue to pink. That's how we know it's about girls instead of boys, apparently. There was a good relationship in this story. So this features Ink, who is Juno's cousin, and then Cassie, who is Liv's daughter. Juno is Yupik Inuit, and her cousin, Ink, is also a Yupik Inuit. So in this story, Ink is a tattoo artist. He is the one who encouraged Juno to love art when they were children. They gave each other their first tattoos when they were 11 with ballpoint pen, ink, and needles. Do not recommend. Ink ends up forming a bond with Cassie, who is the second oldest daughter of Liv. So Cassie is totally feeling bad for herself. She realizes that the man that she was previously engaged to and got into the car accident in Paris with was cheating on her the entire time that they were together, because he wasn't really sure what he wanted, and he just felt like, okay, well, the next thing I should do is get engaged to Cassie and continue this relationship because it's fine, so why not? There was also a lot of really uncomfortable language describing Ink. He is a 6'7" Yupik Inuit man. There is so much discussion of him being a bear. She's constantly using the word ursine to describe him. She writes him as this like wild animalistic urges that he can't control. This is really the only time that I remember Jacinda Wilder using animals to describe one of her male main characters' behaviors, and the fact that she's only doing it for a Yupik Inuit man made me extremely uncomfortable. Like, I did not like it at all. What I did like was the relationship, the emotional connection between Ink and Cassie. However, it had essentially the same plot line as Bad Daddy, and it ends up where Ink is the one who leaves town and he goes out to his family's cabin so that he can give Cassie time and space to figure out what she wants for her own future and decide on her own that she wants to work towards, you know, rehabbing her leg and getting healthier and not just clinging to Ink as like a solution to her problems. She does end up doing all of that on her own. She says that she appreciates Ink for doing that for her and leaving her with time and space to figure out what she needed, because he knew what she needed better than she realized what she needed herself. But overall, I gave it a 2 stars because the language, I just could not get past the language that Jacinda Wilder was using. When we talk about stereotyping people, especially people of color, and Native Americans in particular, there's such a history of racist and race-coded language that we use, you know, animal, barbarian, redskin, all of these things that just have such a negative connotation. I just didn't like the connotations that the language had in this book. It really ruined the writing for me. That's why I'm giving it only the 2 stars. Again, like I said, I am a little bit of a completionist, and part of me wants to know what happens in the stories for the other daughters. in the Goode family, but I'm not sure that I can continue. I don't know that I can support an author that uses such like blatantly racial language about Native Alaskans. And I think if I do read her other books, I won't include them in my videos. Just my end of the year, how many books I've read this year video, because it was bad enough in this book that I'm not sure I even want to give her publicity, honestly, when it comes down to it. So that is a wrap for my January reading wrap up. 14 books. I'm very proud of that. I did cram in a few of the books in the last couple of days. This next month is going to be very intense with my academics, and I planned on going to New York with my parents at least one more time to go skiing. So that's another weekend that I might not be necessarily reading as much as I would other times. And I start my high school observations this month. So one day a week I will be in the high school full time. We'll see where my February reading journey takes me. I anticipate a lot more romances and hopefully quite a few more physical books, since this shelf right here is all contemporary romances and almost all of them are new. So I'm planning on reading through those, and as usual I will definitely read some more on my Kindle Unlimited subscription as well. If you are looking forward to reading any of the books that I mentioned in this video, please let me know. If you have any suggestions for books that sound similar that you think that I might enjoy reading, leave the books and the authors in the comments and I will happily check them out. As always, stay safe, make good choices, and have a great night. Bye! Basically a prison tat, but instead it was out in the Alaskan wilderness. Okay, put my Kindle shut off. You know, the bads and the goods. Eagles green.